New audiobooks on our channel for free every week. Subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss it.
This book is dedicated to a person who does not need to read it. To my unforgettable friend Homer Cray. Preface to the revised and expanded edition of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People was first published in 1937 year with a circulation of only 5,000 copies. Neither Dale Carnegie nor publishers Simon & Schuster expected that the popularity of the book would force a circulation beyond this modest volume. To their surprise, the book became a sensation, and they had to print edition after edition to satisfy the ever-increasing reader demand. The book How to Win Friends and Influence People has taken its place in the history of publishing as one of the international bestsellers. It dealt with a topical area and satisfied a human need peculiar not only to the period after the Great Depression, as evidenced by its continuous sales in the 80s, almost half a century later. Dale Carnegie said it was easier to make $1 million than to add a phrase to the English language. How to Win Friends and Influence People has become just such a phrase, quoted, retold, parroted, used with many shades in various texts from political leaflets to novels. This book has been translated into almost all written languages. Each generation discovers it anew and finds in it something consonant with its time. The above leads us to a logical question: why turn to a book that has proven and continues to prove its unheard of attractiveness? Why experiment with success? To answer this, we must realize that Dale Carnegie himself tirelessly redid his book throughout his life. How to Win Friends and Influence People was written as a practical guide to his courses, The Ability to Speak and Human Relations, and today still continues to be used in this capacity. Until his death in 1955, Carnegie continuously improved and revised this course to adapt it to the changing needs of an ever-expanding audience. It is difficult to find a person more sensitive to the directions of change in today's life than Dale Carnegie. He constantly revised and improved his teaching methods. He has upgraded his book on effective conversation several times. If he had lived longer, he himself would have revised the book How to Win Friends and Influence People so that it would better reflect the changes that have taken place in the world after the 30s. The names of many people quoted in this book, well known at the time of the first publication, are not familiar to most of today's listeners. Some examples and phrases in our social era seem bizarre and outdated, as if they came from the novels of the Victorian era. Due to this, the informativeness and overall impact of the book is weakened. Consequently, when revising and supplementing the book, we aim to make it clearer and closer to the modern reader without distorting the content. We have not changed the essence of the book, but only replaced some examples with more modern ones. Carnegie's lively, impetuous style remained intact. Even the slang of the 30s has been abandoned. Dale Carnegie wrote as he spoke, in an expansive, relaxed conversational style. Therefore, his voice sounds as powerful as ever from the pages of his books and works. Thousands of people, and their number is growing every year, are studying Carnegie courses all over the world. And thousands more are studying the book How to Win Friends and Influence People and are inspired to use the principles proposed in it to improve their lives. For all these readers and listeners, we offer this revised version of the book as a honed and polished, ready-to-use tool. Dorothy Carnegie. How and why was this book written? In the first 35 years of the 20th century, American publishers printed more than 250,000 different books. Most of them are deadly boring, and many have brought financial losses to publishers. I said many. Recently, the chairman of the board of one of the world's largest publishing concerns confessed to me that, despite 75 years of experience, his company suffers losses on 7 out of every 8 books published. Why, then, did I venture to write another book, and you should bother reading and listening to it? Good questions, I'll try to answer them. Since 1912, I have been teaching training courses in New York for businessmen and specialists, men and women. At first, I limited myself to the field of public speaking, trying to teach adults to react quickly and express their thoughts more clearly, convincingly and confidently, both in business negotiations and during speeches to a wide audience. However, over time, I realized that my listeners needed not only public speaking skills, but even more acutely these people needed to learn the subtle art of communicating with each other during business daily meetings and social contacts. Gradually I realized that such preparation would not hurt me either. Looking back at the path I have traveled over the years, I am amazed at how often I lacked tact and understanding. If only a book like this had fallen into my hands 20 years ago. She would be a priceless gift to me. It seems that business people from the business world have particularly serious problems in the process of communicating with others. But they are also important for a housewife, for an architect or an engineer. A few years ago, a study conducted under the patronage of the Carnegie Foundation for Teacher Training revealed a very important and thought-provoking fact, confirmed later by the work performed at the Carnegie Institute of Technology. It turned out that even in such sectors of the economy as mechanical engineering, financial success is only 15% determined by the level of technical knowledge of specialists, and 85% by their human communication skills, that is, personal qualities and the ability to lead people. For a long time, I taught courses annually at the Engineers Club in Philadelphia and at the New York branch of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. In general, probably more than 1,500 engineers have passed through these courses. They did not contact me because, as a result of many years of observations and experience, they realized that those workers who have extensive special knowledge are not highly paid at all. For a very modest salary, you can easily hire, for example, an engineer, accountant, architect or a representative of some other profession. But a specialist who has not only technical knowledge, but also the ability to express his thoughts, take on a leadership role and arouse enthusiasm in subordinates, will receive higher pay. At the best time of his career, John Rockefeller said that the ability to deal with people is the same commodity as sugar or coffee, and I will pay more for it than for anything else in the world. It would be reasonable to assume that every college in the country would be ready to include in its program courses that develop such highly valued abilities in our world. However, if there is a similar practical course designed for adults in any educational institution, it did not attract my attention at the time of writing the book. The University of Chicago and the Association of Schools of the Christian Association of Young People conducted a special study to determine what adults would like to study. The study lasted 2 whole years and cost $25,000. The last stage was held in Meridian, Connecticut, chosen as a typical American city. Every adult resident of Meridian answered 156 questions such as your profession or occupation, education, how you spend your free time, what are your incomes, your hobbies, your aspirations, your problems, what subjects would you like to study. The study showed that adults are most concerned about health-related issues. In second place, relationships with people. How to achieve mutual understanding, what to do to please others and how to persuade them to your point of view. That is why the committee that conducted research in Maiden decided to organize appropriate courses for adult residents of their city. The members of the committee diligently but unsuccessfully tried to find a practical textbook on these issues. Finally, they turned to one of the world's recognized authorities in the field of adult education and asked to recommend some guidance that meets the necessary requirements. He unequivocally replied, "I know what these people want, but no one has written such a book yet." I was convinced of the truth of this statement by my own experience, having been searching for a practical, meeting all the requirements manual on interpersonal relationships for many years. Since there was no such book, I tried to write it myself so that I could later use it in my courses. This book is in front of you. I hope you like it. While working on the book, I reread everything I could find on this topic, from newspaper reports, magazine articles, protocols of divorce proceedings to the works of old philosophers and new psychologists. In addition, I invited an experienced researcher who spent a year and a half in various libraries and read everything I missed. He waded through volumes of scientific works on psychology, intently studying hundreds of journal articles, looked through countless biographies, trying to establish how the great leaders of all times built relationships with other people. We read their biographies. We have studied the biographies of all outstanding people from Julius Caesar to Thomas Edison. We have read more than 100 biographies of Theodore Roosevelt alone. We decided to spare neither time nor money to identify all the practical techniques that have been used for many centuries to win friends and influence others. I have personally interviewed many successful people, trying to figure out how they communicate with others. Many of them were world famous. These are inventors Marconi and Edison, political leaders Franklin Roosevelt and James Farley, researchers such as Martin Johnson, big businessmen, including Owen Young, movie stars Clark Gable and Mary Pickford. Using all the collected material, I prepared a short conversation, calling it How to Win Friends and Influence People. I said a brief one, however, it was like this only at the beginning, soon turning into an hour-and-a-half lecture. For a long time, every year I read it to adults in courses at the Carnegie Institute in New York. Reading this lecture, I invited the audience to check her position during business and social contacts in their professional activities and, returning to the classroom, tell about the results obtained. What an interesting assignment. These men and women, eager for self-improvement, were passionate about the idea of working in a new type of laboratory, in the first and only laboratory in history dealing with interpersonal problems. The book you are listening to was not written in the usual sense of the word. In this peculiar laboratory, she grew up like a child growing up, absorbing the experience of thousands of people. We started many years ago by developing a set of rules printed on a card the size of a postcard. The following year, a larger card was issued, then a leaflet appeared, then a whole series of brochures, each of which gradually increased in size and volume. Finally, as a result of 15 years of experiments and research, this book appeared. The rules set out in it are not the result of purely theoretical reasoning or speculation. Their action is like magic. It sounds implausible, but I have seen how the application of these principles has radically changed the lives of many people. I'll give you an example. An entrepreneur who employed 314 employees entered our courses. For years, he continuously urged, criticized and scolded them all indiscriminately. No one has heard from him pleasantries, words of approval and praise. After getting acquainted with the principles given in this book, the entrepreneur dramatically changed his philosophy of life. Now there is a new atmosphere of dedication, enthusiasm and collectivism in his organization. 314 enemies turned into 314 friends. At one of the classes, he proudly declared in front of the entire audience, "Before, passing through my company, I did not hear the words of greeting. When I approached, the employees tried to look the other way. Now they are all my friends and even the doorman calls me by name." The income of this entrepreneur increased, he had more free time and, what is incomparably more important, he felt much happier at work and with his family. The application of these principles has made it possible for countless merchants to dramatically expand their trading operations and even open new bank accounts, which they tried in vain to achieve before. Administrative workers have increased both their authority and salary. One of them told me about a significant salary increase, which he attributes to the fact that he began to follow the proposed rules. And another responsible employee of the company HES Works Company from Philadelphia at the age of 65 had to be demoted due to inconsistency and inability to lead people. After studying at our courses, he changed so much that he was not only not demoted, but also transferred to a higher paid position. At banquets on the occasion of the end of the courses, I often had to hear from the spouses of our students that their family life has become much more prosperous since their husbands or wives started studying with us. Often our listeners themselves are amazed by their successes. It feels like magic. Sometimes, in a fit of enthusiasm, they called me at home on Sunday, unable to wait another 48 hours to report on their achievements at the next lesson. One person, carried away by a conversation about these principles, sat up late into the night discussing them with other listeners. At 3 o'clock in the morning, everyone went home, but he was so shocked by the realization of his own mistakes and so inspired by the prospects that he could not sleep. He never fell asleep that night or the next. Who is he? A naive, poorly educated person, ready to rant about every new theory? No, far from it. He is a sophisticated businessman, a well-known art dealer, a very secular person who graduated from 2 universities in Europe and speaks 3 languages. While working on this chapter, I received a letter from a German aristocrat, a representative of the old school, whose ancestors were career officers of the Morgenthauers. In this letter, sent by a transatlantic liner, he spoke with almost religious pathos about cases of successful application of our rules. Another of our listeners, a guard from New York, a graduate of Harvard University, a wealthy man, the owner of a large carpet factory, said that in 14 weeks of classes on our system, he learned more about the art of influencing people than in 4 years of college. Absurd? Funny? Fantastic? Of course, you can reject this statement with any definition you like. I will simply quote without comment the statement made by a conservative and quite successful graduate of Harvard University in a public speech to an audience of almost 600 people at the Yale Club in New York on Thursday evening, February 23, 1933. Compared to what we should be, said the famous Harvard professor William James, our condition can be described as half asleep. People use only a small part of their physical and mental resources. In a broad sense, we can say that a person lives far beyond the best of his abilities. He has abilities of various kinds, which he usually does not know how to use. Oh, these abilities that you usually don't know how to use. The sole purpose of this book is to help you identify, develop and usefully apply these hidden unused values. Education, according to former Princeton University President John Hyben, is the ability to act correctly in any everyday situations. If, after listening to the first 3 chapters of this book, you do not become a little better equipped to face various everyday situations, I will consider that this book has failed in what concerns you specifically. Because the great goal of education, as Herbert Spencer said, is not knowledge, but action. And this book is a book of action. Dale Carnegie, 1936. 9 tips on how to get the most out of this book. There is one very necessary condition, much more important than any rules or methods, without which you will not be able to get the most out of this book. Without it, thousands of teaching methods will be useless. However, with this priceless gift, you will be able to perform miracles without advice on how to benefit from books. What is this magical condition? Here it is, a deep passionate desire to learn and a firm intention to improve your ability to build relationships with people. How can you develop such a desire in yourself? Constantly reminding yourself of the extreme importance of these principles for your life and career, imagining how the application of these principles helps you move quickly to a high position in society and to financial success. Repeating to myself over and over again, my popularity, my luck and my income largely depend on the art of communicating with people. I recommend that you first skim through the table of contents for the audio files to get a general idea. It is possible that after listening to one chapter, you will have a desire to immediately move on to the next. Do not do this if you are not listening to this book just for fun. But having started this lesson in order to learn to better understand the problems of relationships between people, go back to the beginning of the chapter and listen carefully to it again. In the end, this will save time and bear fruit. When working with a book, stop more often to think about what you have heard. Ask yourself how and when you could apply each piece of advice. While listening, have a simple or red pencil, pen or marker handy to write down important tips and recommendations. Taking notes makes acquaintance with the book more interesting and useful, greatly facilitating repeated listening. I know a woman who has been in charge of the office of a large insurance concern for 15 years. Every month she rereads all the insurance contracts signed by her company. Yes, she reads many of them from month to month, from year to year. Why? Experience tells her that this is the only way to keep in mind the contents of these contracts. I have been writing a book about public speaking for almost 2 years, and yet I reread it from time to time to remember what is written in my own book. It's amazing how quickly everything is forgotten. Therefore, if you intend to extract real long-term benefits from this book, do not think that it is enough to swallow it in one sitting. After listening carefully, you should review your notes monthly for at least a few hours. Keep them on your desk at all times, look into them more often. Do not forget about the rich opportunities for improvement that you will be able to take advantage of in the near future. Remember that the automatic application of the proposed rules is achieved only with continuous and persistent reference to them. There is no other way. Bernard Shaw once remarked, "Just teaching something to a person, you will never teach him anything." Shaw was right. Learning is an active process, and one's own experience plays an essential role in it. Therefore, in an effort to master the techniques offered in this book, bring them to life. Use them at the slightest opportunity, otherwise they will be quickly forgotten. Only the knowledge that is applied in practice can be kept in mind. It may not be easy for you to constantly follow the rules given in the book. Even I, the author of this book, often find it difficult to use all my recommendations in practice. So, when angry, it is much easier to criticize and condemn than to try to understand the point of view of the interlocutor. It is often easier to find flaws than a reason for approval. It seems natural to talk about what you want, not what the other wants. There are a lot of similar examples. Therefore, while listening to this book, remember that you are trying not just to get information, but also to develop new habits. Moreover, you are trying to choose a new life path, and this requires time, perseverance, and daily training. So, refer to this book more often. Consider it as a reference book on the relationship between people. Faced with another specific problem, for example, the need to achieve any specific actions from the child, to persuade the wife to your point of view or to satisfy an irritated client. Don't give in to the first impulse. Don't act impulsively. This usually turns out to be incorrect. Open your notes, and then try out the suggested techniques in practice and watch miracles happen. Turn the process of learning these rules into a fun game. For example, promise your wife, son, or colleague to pay a dime or $1 whenever they teach you in violation of any written rules. Speaking to my students one day, the chairman of the board of a large Wall Street bank described a very effective system that he used for self-improvement. Having a formally low level of education, this man is currently one of the most significant financiers in America. He admitted that he owes the successes achieved to the constant application of the system he invented. I will describe this system in his words, trying to be as accurate as memory will allow. For many years I have been keeping a meeting book in which I record all my daily business contacts. My family knows not to count on me on Saturday night. Part of this time I always devote to the process of introspection, revision and evaluation of my actions. After lunch, I go to my room, open my meeting book, look through and analyze the records of all the conversations, meetings and discussions that were held during the week. I ask myself, what mistakes have been made during this time? What did I do right, and what could have been done better? And in what way? What lessons can I learn from this? Often this and the weekly review plunged me into despair. I was literally shocked by my own blunders. Of course, over the years, such blunders are becoming rarer. Sometimes, after Saturday's debriefing, I want to pat myself on the shoulder. This system of self-analysis and self-education, which I have been following for many years, has given me much more than any of my endeavors. She developed my decision-making ability and helped me to establish contacts with people to a large extent. I highly recommend it to everyone. Why don't you use a similar system of control over the application of the principles described in this book? Trying to do this, you will get at least 2 useful results. First, get involved in the process of self-education, which is interesting in itself and also very useful. Secondly, you will find that your ability to establish contacts and maintain relationships with people is developing rapidly. Make notes about the successful application of our principles. Be specific. Record names, dates, results. Keeping such records will inspire you to even greater efforts. And how nice it will be to accidentally stumble upon these notes after many years, how touching they will seem. So, in order to get the most out of this book, develop a deep active desire to master the principles of relationships between people. Listen to each chapter twice before moving on to the next one. Listening more often, stop to ask yourself how you could apply this technique. Write down every important thought. Review your records every month. At the slightest opportunity, apply the rules set out in it. Use this book as a reference guide when solving everyday problems. Turn learning into a fun game by promising someone close to you a small cash prize for each case when they catch you violating one of these principles. Monitor the learning process weekly. Ask yourself what mistakes you have made, what successes you have achieved, what lessons you have learned for the future. Keep a diary, indicating in it when, how, and with what result the studied rules were applied. Part 1. Basic Methods of Dealing with People. Chapter 1. If you want to collect honey, do not overturn the hive. On the 7th of May, 1931, New York was shocked by the completion of an unprecedented police raid. After several weeks of stalking Crowley, 2 guns, a murderer and a bandit, who was chased like a wild animal, not giving him the opportunity to drink and smoke, got trapped in his beloved's apartment on West End Avenue. 150 police officers and detectives besieged his hideout on the top floor of the house. First, they tried to smoke out this killer of policemen with tear gas by punching a hole in the roof. Then machine guns were installed on the roofs of the surrounding houses, and for more than an hour the echo of pistol shots and machine gun bursts walked through one of the most beautiful residential quarters of New York. Hiding behind a massive chair, Crowley was desperately shooting back at the police, and 10,000 excited onlookers were watching this battle. The streets of New York have never seen anything like this. When Crowley was captured, Police Commissioner Mulroney declared that this thug with 2 pistols was one of the most dangerous criminals in the entire history of New York. He can kill a man, just spit. But how did Crowley see himself? We know that. While the police were shelling his shelter, he wrote a letter addressed to those concerned, and the blood from his wounds left brown marks on the paper. This is what Crowley stated in his letter: "A tired but kind heart beats in my chest, which has done no harm to anyone." Shortly before that, Crowley, having stopped the car at the side of a country road leading from Long Island, was hugging his girlfriend in it. A policeman approached the car and asked to show his driver's license. Without saying a word, Crowley pulled out a pistol and literally riddled the policeman with a hail of bullets. When the dying man fell, the bandit jumped out of the car, grabbed a revolver from the patrol officer's holster and fired another bullet into the motionless body. And this killer wrote, "A tired but kind heart beats in my chest, which has done no harm to anyone." Crowley was sentenced to death by electric chair. When he was taken to the death row unit of Sing Sing prison, he said, "Do you think I was convicted of murder? No, I'm convicted of defending myself." The essence of this story is that Crowley 2 Guns really did not admit any guilt. Do you think this position is unusual for criminals? Listen further. I spent the best years of my life giving people pleasant entertainment and helping them have a good time, and for this I received only an insult and the position of a man who is being hunted. These are the words of Al Capone, the most notorious enemy of American society, the most dangerous gangster leader of all that has ever terrorized Chicago. Al Capone did not admit any guilt. He really considered himself a benefactor of society, its unappreciated and misunderstood benefactor. The Dutchman Schultz also treated himself before he died from the bullets of gangsters in Newark. This Schultz is one of the most notorious villains of New York. In a newspaper interview he said that he was a benefactor of society, and he believed in it himself. I had an interesting correspondence with Louis Lowes, who was the warden of Sing Sing prison for many years. He claims that only a few criminals in Sing Sing consider themselves bad people. In their opinion, they are the same people as you or me. They logically justify and explain their actions. They can tell you why they had to break into a safe or open fire. Most of them try through various logical constructions, true or false, to justify their antisocial actions even to themselves, insistently proving that they should not have been imprisoned. If Al Capone, Crowley Two Guns, Dutch Schultz and similar thugs outside prisons consider themselves innocent, then what can we say about ordinary people we encounter? John Wanamaker, the founder of the foundation bearing his name, once confessed, 30 years ago I realized that it was just stupid to grumble. I have enough trouble with my own shortcomings, so why be annoyed that God did not give everyone mental abilities anyway? Wanamaker learned this truth early. I've been groping my way through this world for a third of a century, until I finally understood. In 99 cases out of 100, whether they are right or wrong, people do not condemn themselves for their actions. Criticism is useless. It forces a person to defend himself, stimulating attempts to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it strikes a blow to a person's pride, hurts his self-esteem and causes him resentment. Barry Skinner, a well-known psychologist, experimentally proved that an animal rewarded for good behavior learns faster and uses the learned more effectively than an animal receiving punishment for bad behavior. Further studies have confirmed these findings in relation to humans. Judging, we do not achieve lasting changes, often provoke feelings of resentment. According to another major psychologist Hans Selye, as much as we crave approval, we are terrified of condemnation. George Johnston, coordinator of the engineering company. His duties include ensuring that company employees wear helmets when performing field work. He reported that, passing by a worker without a fairy tale, he always made remarks to him and, using the authority of the boss, forced him to follow the instructions. His answers were gloomy glances, and when he left the territory, the workers took off their helmets. He decided to take a different approach, and the next time he saw a worker without a fairy tale, he asked if it was comfortable and well-fitted. Then he reminded the man in a benevolent tone that the helmet was designed to protect him from injury and should always be on his head during work. As a result, workers began to follow instructions more often without feelings of resentment or emotional quarrels. Thousands of pages of books abound with stories that testify to the futility of criticism. Take, for example, the famous quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft. She split the Republican Party, brought Woodrow Wilson to the White House, had a radical impact on the World War and changed the course of history. Let's briefly consider the factual side of the case. After leaving the White House in 1908, Theodore Roosevelt supported Taft, who was elected president. Then Roosevelt went to Africa to hunt lions. Upon his return, he developed incredible activity. He condemned Taft for conservatism, tried to get himself nominated for president for a third term, founded the Progressive Party, almost destroying the Republican one at the same time. As a result, in the next election, William Howard Taft and the Republican Party received the support of only 2 states, Vermont and Utah. This party has never known such a crushing defeat. Theodore Roosevelt blamed Taft for all the failures, but did President Taft consider himself guilty? Of course not. With tears in his eyes, he exclaimed, "I don't see what I could have done differently." Who was to blame, Roosevelt or Taft? Frankly, I don't know, I'm not too interested. I just want to emphasize that none of Theodore Roosevelt's critical remarks convinced Taft that he was wrong. They just made him justify himself and repeat over and over again with tears in his eyes, "I don't see that I could do otherwise." Or take the oil scandal in the dummy type. Newspapers wrote about him with indignation in the early 20s. He stirred up the whole country. No one could remember such a thing happening in the life of American society. Here are the bare facts. Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior in the Harding government, was tasked with leasing state-owned oil tanks in the Elk Hill and Dome-type areas that were left for the needs of the Navy. Did the minister arrange a competitive bidding foul? No. He simply handed over this exceptionally lucrative contract to his friend Edward de Jenny. And what did de Jenny do? He provided Minister Folleau with what he called a loan of $100,000. Then the minister was arbitrarily ordered by the United States Marine Corps to arrive in the Elk Hill area and drive away competitors who were pumping oil from the field from adjacent areas. These people, driven from their plots, under the threat of rifles and bayonets, rushed to court and the veil of secrecy over circumstances such as the Dome scandal was dispelled. This case smelled so bad that it ruined the Harding administration, caused a feeling of disgust throughout the country, almost led to the collapse of the Republican Party. Albert Fall was imprisoned. Folleau was condemned extremely harshly, as few statesmen throughout history. Do you think he repented? No. A few years later, Herbert Hoover hinted in his public speech that President Harding's death was caused by emotional distress and anguish due to the betrayal of a friend. Hearing this, Mrs. Fall jumped up from her chair, began to cry, shook her fist into space and screamed, "What? Did the fowl betray Harding? No, my husband didn't betray anyone. Even a house full of gold wouldn't tempt him to do a bad thing. It was he who was betrayed, beaten and crucified. This is human nature in action. Everyone is to blame, except me. We are all like that. Therefore, when tomorrow it occurs to you to criticize someone, remember Al Capone, Crowley 2 Guns and Albert Fall. Don't forget that criticism is like carrier pigeons, they always come home. Think about it, the person you are going to accuse and condemn will most likely justify himself and, in turn, condemn you or, like the meek Taft, will repeat, "I don't see that I could do otherwise." On Saturday morning, April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln lay dying in a cheap rooming house just across from Ford's Theater, where Booth shot him. A squalid gas jet flickered with yellow light. Lincoln stretched out diagonally on a bed too short for him, over which hung a cheap reproduction of the famous painting by Rosa Bonheur Horse Fair. At the bedside of the dying president, Secretary of War Stanton said, "Here lies the most impeccable leader the world has ever seen." What was the secret of Lincoln's success in dealing with people? For 10 years I studied the life of Abraham Lincoln and devoted 3 whole years to working on the book The Unknown Lincoln. I believe that I have studied the personality of the president and his family life with the greatest possible care. In addition, I specifically researched Lincoln's methods of communicating with people. Did he allow himself to engage in criticism? Oh, yeah. As a young man, he lived in the P. John Creek Valley in Indiana. At that time, he not only made critical remarks about others, but also wrote letters and poems ridiculing them, which he scattered on rural roads so that they would be found for sure. One of these letters caused resentment that smoldered throughout his life. Even after becoming a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln openly attacked his opponents in letters that he published in newspapers, but one day, as they say, he went too far. In the fall of 1842, he cruelly ridiculed a vain, quarrelsome politician named James Shields. Lincoln dedicated a scathing lampoon to him and published it as an anonymous letter in the Springfield Journal newspaper. The whole city was laughing loudly. Shields, arrogant and touchy, was seething with indignation. Having found out who the author of the letter was, he went to Lincoln and challenged him to a duel. Lincoln was an opponent of the duel, but he could not evade the challenge without compromising his honor. He was given a choice of weapons. Counting on his very long arms, he chose a cavalry broadsword and took some fencing lessons from a West Point graduate. On the appointed day, the duelists met on the sandbank of the Mississippi, ready to fight to the death, but at the last minute the seconds intervened and stopped the duel. It was one of the darkest incidents in Lincoln's life. He became an invaluable lesson of mastery in the art of dealing with people for the future president. Lincoln never wrote another insulting letter. He never made fun of anyone again. Since then, he has hardly criticized anyone, never and for nothing. During the Civil War, Lincoln had to appoint a new general to the post of commander of the Army of the Potomac several times. Each of them Clan, Pope, Burnside, Hooker, Meade made blunders, driving Lincoln to despair. Incompetent generals were mercilessly condemned on all corners, but Lincoln remained calm, without malice towards anyone and with mercy for everyone, quoting one of his favorite sayings, "Do not judge, so you will not be judged." And even when Mrs. Lincoln or anyone else spoke harshly about Southerners, Lincoln said, "Don't criticize them, we would be exactly the same in similar circumstances." Nevertheless, if anyone had enough to criticize, it was Lincoln. Here is just one example. The Battle of Gettysburg lasted for the first 3 days of July, 1863. On the night of the 4th of July, a heavy downpour flooded the entire area, and the defeated General Lee was forced to retreat to the south. Having gone out with his defeated army to the Descendant River, Lee found himself in front of a swollen river from the rain, with the Federal army behind him. It was a trap from which there was no escape. And Lincoln understood that. Before him was a heaven-sent opportunity to capture Lee's army and immediately end the war. Inspired with hope, Lincoln ordered General Meade, without wasting time on convening a military council, to immediately attack the Southerners. He transmitted his order by phone, sending a special courier after him with a demand for urgent action. And what about General Meade? He did exactly the opposite of what he was told. Violating Lincoln's order, he called a council of war and, being undecided, endlessly delayed, sending all sorts of excuses by telegraph and flatly refusing to attack. In the end, the water in the river subsided, and the army of the Southerners crossed the Descendant, getting out of the trap. Lincoln was furious. "What does this mean?" he asked his son Robert. "Great God, what does this mean? They were almost in our hands, and the slightest effort is enough to make it all over. However, nothing I said or did made our army move. Under the circumstances, almost any general could defeat Poe there, I could defeat him myself." Severely disappointed, Lincoln wrote a letter to Meade. Remember that at that time of his life he was extremely moderate and restrained in his expressions, so his letter was equivalent to the strictest reprimand. "Dear General, I don't think you can imagine the scale of the misfortune caused by Lee's retreat. He was almost in our hands, and the capture of his army, taking into account our other recent successes, would have put an end to the war. Now the hostilities will last indefinitely. You didn't dare to attack Liv last Monday. How are you going to do that now that it's south of the river? And you can take with you no more than 2/3 of the forces that you had at that time. It is unwise to hope, and I do not expect it, that you will be able to achieve much now. You have missed a great opportunity, which I am extremely upset about." What did Meade do when he received Lincoln's message? Meade never saw the letter, Lincoln never sent it. It was found in the president's papers after his death. I suppose, of course, it's just a guess that after writing the letter, Lincoln looked out the window and said to himself, "Wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't jump to conclusions." Sitting in the silence of the White House, it's easy to give orders to attack. And if I had seen as much blood as the Foreign Ministry over the past week, if I had heard the heart-rending groans and screams of the wounded and dying, then, perhaps, having the timid nature of the Foreign Ministry, I would not have sought to launch an offensive. Anyway, the job is done. By sending a letter, I will relieve my soul, but I will force the Foreign Ministry to justify itself. He will most likely try to blame me for what happened. Unpleasant experiences may affect his fitness for further service as a commander and may force him to retire. So Lincoln put the letter aside. My own bitter experience has shown that harsh criticism and reproaches are almost always useless. According to President Theodore Roosevelt, when faced with a difficult problem, he used to look back at the large portrait of Lincoln that hung over his desk in the White House, asking himself, what would Lincoln do in my place, how would he solve this problem? Let's also, the next time we have a desire to scold someone, pull out a $5 bill from our pocket, look at the image of Lincoln and ask ourselves, what would Lincoln do if he had this problem? From time to time Mark Twain lost his temper and wrote letters that made the paper turn red. So one day he wrote to the person who caused his rage, "You deserve a funeral pass. Just try to say something, I'll see how you get it." In another case, he indignantly wrote to the editor about the proofreader's attempts to improve my spelling and punctuation and ordered, "Look into my copy and make sure that your proofreader extracts his assumptions from the porridge in his decomposed brain." Writing such venomous messages brought Mark Twain relief. These letters allowed him to let off steam and did no real harm, because the writer's wife invariably withdrew them from the mail. They were never sent. Do you want to remake, fix, and improve someone? Great. That's fine. I'm totally on your side, but why not start with yourself? From a purely selfish point of view, this is much more useful than trying to improve others, and safer, too. Do not complain that there is snow on your neighbor's roof if your own threshold is not cleaned. These are the words of Confucius. As a young man, I tried hard to impress people. Once I was preparing an article about writers for a magazine and wrote a stupid letter to Richard Harding Davis, who then stood out noticeably on the literary horizon of America, asking him to tell me about his method of work. A few weeks before, I received a letter from someone with an intriguing postscript dictated but not read, which made a strong impression on me. It seemed to me that the author of the letter is a very big, important, and busy person. I was by no means too busy, but I really wanted to impress Richard Harding Davis, and therefore ended my short letter with the same words dictated, but not read. He didn't reply to my letter, just returned it, carelessly writing across my postscript, "In your bad manners, you have surpassed yourself." I probably did something stupid and deserved his reproach. However, in response to his remark, as is typical of a person, I was indignant. This feeling of indignation was so strong that when I learned about Davis's death 10 years later, the first thing I remembered, and I am ashamed to admit it, was the offense I had been hurt. Wishing tomorrow to get rid of the feeling of resentment that can haunt us for decades, we will engage in severe self-criticism, even if we are not quite sure of its justice. When communicating with people, remember, this is mostly an illogically reasoning creation, but an emotional one, filled with prejudices, and driven by pride and vanity. The sensitive Thomas Hardy, one of the best novelists, whose work undoubtedly enriched English literature, was forced by harsh criticism to abandon writing fiction forever. The English poet Thomas Chatterton was driven to suicide by criticism. Benjamin Franklin, known in his youth for his tactlessness, eventually became so diplomatic and skilled in communicating with people that he was appointed American ambassador to France. What is the secret of his success? "I will never speak ill of a person," he repeated, "but I will tell you all the good things I know about everyone." Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most of them do so. But to show understanding and condescension requires a strong character and self-control. The greatness of a person is manifested in the way he treats little people, Carlyle said. Bob Hoover, a well-known test pilot, a regular participant in aviation performances, was returning home to Los Angeles from an air show in San Diego. According to an entry in the flight log, at an altitude of 300 feet, both engines suddenly failed. Skillfully maneuvering, the pilot managed to land the plane. The car was badly damaged, but no one was injured. Immediately after the emergency landing, Hoover checked the fuel in the plane's tanks. As he suspected, the World War II turboprop-powered aircraft was fueled not with gasoline, but with jet fuel. Returning to the airfield, the pilot wished to see the mechanic who was preparing his plane. The young man who made the mistake was not alive, not dead. He has just caused the crash of a very expensive car and almost took the lives of 3 people. Tears rolled down his face when he saw Hoover approaching. Can you imagine Hoover's indignation and surely imagine what kind of dressing down this proud high-class pilot could arrange for such negligence? However, he did not scold the mechanic and did not even criticize him. Instead, Bob Hoover put his big hand on his shoulder and said, "I believe you will never do this again. And to prove it, I'm asking you to service my F-51 tomorrow." Often parents succumb to the temptation to criticize their own children. Well, are you waiting for me to say not to do this? But I won't say those words. I will note only one thing: before criticizing them, read the classics of American journalism. Father Forgets. This article first appeared in People's Home Journal. We present it here with the permission of the author in the form as it was printed in Reader's Digest. Father Forgets. This is one of those short stories created in a fit of sincere feelings that touch the deep strings of the soul of so many readers that they become long-term leaders in the number of reprints. The author of the article, Livingston Larned, writes, "Since its first appearance, Father Forgets has been reprinted in hundreds of newspapers and magazines across the country. The story was published almost as actively in many other languages. I personally gave permission to thousands of those who wanted to read it in schools, churches, and university lectures. It has been played countless times on various radio stations. To my surprise, it was used by periodic college and high school buildings. Sometimes a small work enjoys fantastic success. That's exactly what happened with this story." Father Forgets. Livingston Larned. Listen, son, I'm saying this now while you're sleeping. Her cheek is resting on a small hand, her blonde curls are stuck to her damp forehead. I sneaked into your room just a few minutes ago, when I was sitting with a newspaper in the library. I was overcome by a wave of remorse. I came to your bedroom with a confession. I thought about being too hard on you. I scolded you when you were going to school because you barely touched your face with a towel. I told you off for not cleaning your shoes. I shouted at you angrily when you threw your things on the floor. At breakfast, I also found something to scold you for. You spilled something, swallowed food in large chunks, put your elbows on the table and spread too much butter on bread. When I was in a hurry to catch my train, and you, leaving for a walk, turned around, waved to me and shouted, "Goodbye, Daddy." Frowning, I replied, "Straighten your shoulders, don't slouch." The same thing happened again in the evening. Passing by, I saw you on your knees playing marbles. Holes have already formed on the stockings. I humiliated you in front of your friends when you were walking ahead of me towards home. The stockings were expensive. If you paid for them yourself, you'd be more careful. Listen, son, to what your father tells you. Do you remember how later, when I was reading, sitting in the library, you timidly came in and looked at me with some kind of pain in your eyes? I glanced at you over the top of the newspaper, impatient, dissatisfied with being interrupted. You stood hesitantly in the doorway. "What do you want?" I muttered. You, without saying anything, quickly rushed to me, wrapped your arms around my neck and kissed me. And your little hands clenched with the love that God has kindled in your heart and that even neglect cannot quench. And then you left. I heard you coming up the stairs. And at that moment, my son, the newspaper fell out of my hands and a terrible paralyzing fear seized me. What has habit done to me? The habit of scolding, looking for mistakes, making comments. This is my reward to you for being a boy. It's not because I don't love you, because I expect too much from a child and evaluate you by the standards of my years. And there is so much good, wonderful, sincere in you, in your character. Your little heart is like a huge disk of the sun rising over the wild hills. I saw it in your sudden impulse when you ran up and kissed me before going to bed. And nothing else matters today, son. I came to your bed in the dark and knelt down ashamed. This is not enough redemption. I know you wouldn't understand all the things I'm telling you now in your waking hours. But tomorrow I will be a real father. I'll be your sidekick. I will suffer when you suffer, and laugh when you laugh. I will bite my tongue when impatient words are ready to break from it, and I will repeat it like a spell. It's just a boy. A little boy. I'm afraid I imagined you as a grown man. Now when I look at you, son, curled up tired in your crib, I see that you are still a child. Just yesterday, your mother was carrying you in her arms, and your head was lying on her shoulder. I demanded too much, too much. Instead of judging people, let's try to understand them, imagine the motivation of their actions. This is much more useful and interesting than naked criticism. At the same time, a person develops empathy for others, tolerance and goodwill. To understand everything means to forgive everything. As Dr. Johnson said, God himself does not intend to judge a person until the end of his days. Why should we do this? Don't criticize. Refrain from judging. Chapter 2. The big secret of the art of dealing with people in the sublunary world. There is only one way to get someone to do something. Have you ever thought about it? Yes, indeed, only one, and it consists in awakening a person's desire to do this. Remember, there is no other way. Of course, you can force a person to give you his watch at gunpoint. You can force an employee to work under threat of dismissal. You can get the right actions from the child with the help of a whip or punishment. However, all these crude methods can have undesirable consequences. The only way to encourage you to do anything is to give you what you want. What do you want? Sigmund Freud argued that all our actions are based on two motives: sexual attraction and the desire to become great. Professor John Dewey, one of the most astute American philosophers, put it a little differently. In his opinion, the deepest aspiration inherent in human nature is the desire to be significant. Remember this expression. The desire to be significant. It is essential. Many pages of this book will be dedicated to him. So, what do you want? In fact, not so much, but you really achieve what you want with obvious perseverance. Here is a list that is true for almost every normal person. Health and preservation of life, food, sleep, money and things that are acquired for them, life in the afterlife, sexual satisfaction, the well-being of their children, consciousness of their own importance. Almost all of these desires are usually satisfied. All but one. As deep and powerful as the desire for food and sleep, it is rarely realized. Freud calls it the desire to be great, and Dewey calls it the desire to be significant. One day Lincoln began his letter with the words, "Everyone likes compliments," and William James claimed that the passionate desire of people to be appreciated is the deepest property of human nature. Notice, not just a desire, a need or an aspiration, but a passionate aspiration. Only a few can satisfy this cruel, constantly tormenting hunger of the human race, but the individual who really satisfies it gets power over the hearts of people, and even the undertaker will be sad when he dies. The desire to realize a sense of self-importance and being chosen is one of the main characteristics that distinguish a person from an animal. Let's illustrate this statement. As a boy, I lived on a farm in Missouri, where my father bred wonderful Jersey Durek pigs and breeding white-faced cattle. Showing pigs and cattle at county fairs and exhibitions throughout the Midwest, we have repeatedly won first prizes. My father pinned the awards he received on a strip of white muslin, and when friends or visitors came to us, he always took it out. He held one end of a long strip in his hands, I held the other, showing the guests a long row of blue badges. Pigs were indifferent to awards, but my father was interested in these badges. The collected collection gave him the opportunity to feel significant. If our ancestors had not had this ardent desire for self-affirmation, there would have been no civilization. Without him, we wouldn't have been able to get far away from the animals. It was the desire for self-affirmation that made the poor uneducated grocery clerk study the law books that he found at the bottom of a barrel of household junk, bought by an outdated man for 50 cents. You've probably heard about this clerk's. His name was Lincoln. It was this desire that inspired Dickens to write his immortal novels. It also inspired Sarah Christopher Wren to create symphonies in stone. The thirst for self-affirmation forced Rockefeller to save millions, which he never managed to spend. And it was this feeling that forced the richest man in your city to build a house, its size significantly exceeding the needs of his family. Obeying this feeling, you wear the latest styles of clothes, drive the latest car model and praise your outstanding children. It is this desire that leads many boys and girls to gangs and criminal associations. According to former New York Police Commissioner Mulroney, the average young criminal is completely absorbed in his own person and, after his arrest, first of all demands a tabloid newspaper representing him as a hero. The unpleasant prospect of imprisonment seems too remote to him, but for now he can admire his photo next to photos of great athletes, movie stars and politicians. Tell me how you achieve self-affirmation, and I'll tell you who you are. The method of achievement reveals you the most essential, determines your character. For example, John Rockefeller proved himself by giving money for the construction of a modern hospital in Beijing, the capital of China, designed for millions of poor people whom he had never seen and would never see. On the other hand, Dillinger achieved the same goal by becoming a bandit, murderer and bank robber. Pursued by FBI agents, he broke into a farmhouse in Minnesota and declared, "I am a Dillinger." He was proud of his position as public enemy number one. "I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm a Dillinger." Indeed, the only significant difference between Dillinger and Rockefeller is the way in which each of them achieved self-affirmation. History is replete with funny examples of how famous people fought for the realization of this need. Even George Washington wanted to be called Your Grace the President of the United States. Columbus petitioned for the title of Admiral of the Ocean and Viceroy of India. Catherine too did not open letters that were addressed otherwise than to Her Imperial Majesty. And Mrs. Lincoln, like a tigress, attacked Mrs. Grant in the White House, shouting, "How dare you sit down in my presence without my invitation?" Our millionaires financed Admiral Byrd's expedition to Antarctica in 1928 on the condition that the chain of ice mountains would be named after them. Victor Hugo sought the renaming of Paris in his honor, no more, no less. Even Shakespeare, the greatest of the greats, tried to enhance the brilliance of his name by acquiring a family coat of arms. Sometimes people use the disease to gain sympathy and attention, to feel significant. As an example, let's recall Mrs. McKinley. Realizing the need for a sense of self-importance, she forced her husband, the President of the United States, to leave important state affairs and spend hours near her bed, hugging and persuading her to fall asleep. She tried to quench her thirst for attention by demanding his presence while the doctor treated her teeth, and once even gave her husband a stormy scene when he had to leave her alone with the dentist because of a meeting with Secretary of State John Hay. The writer Mary Roberts Rinehart told me about a bright, energetic young unmarried woman who fell ill in order to gain a sense of her own importance. Once this woman had to think seriously about something unpleasant, perhaps about her age. Ahead of her were waiting for many years of loneliness, which did not promise anything good. She went to bed, and for 10 long years her old mother went with trays to the 3rd floor and back, caring for her. Finally, the mother could not stand such a strain and died. The patient languished for several weeks, and then got out of bed, dressed and returned to normal life. According to some authoritative experts, people sometimes really go crazy, trying to gain consciousness of significance in the world of crazy dreams, which they were deprived of in the harsh real world. In the United States, the number of patients suffering from mental illness exceeds the number of all other patients combined. What are the causes of insanity? No one can answer such a difficult question unequivocally. We know that certain diseases, like syphilis, destroy brain cells, resulting in mental illness. About half of mental illnesses can be associated with physical causes, damage to brain cells as a result of alcoholism, intoxication and various injuries. But the second half of people suffering from mental disorders, apparently, does not have any organic defects in brain cells. Post-mortem examination of brain tissues of such patients reveals their apparent health. Why are these people going crazy? I asked this question to the chief physician of one of the most famous psychiatric clinics. This recognized specialist, who received the highest awards for his knowledge in the field of psychiatry, frankly admitted that he did not know the answer to this question. And no one knows for sure. However, he noticed that many people get into a state of insanity with the knowledge of their own importance, which they could not achieve in the real world. Then he told me a story. The marriage of one of my patients turned out to be tragic. She wanted sexual satisfaction, children and social prestige, but life destroyed all her hopes. Her husband didn't love her. Not wanting to communicate with her even at the dinner table, he forced her to serve food in his room. She had no children, no social status. She's gone crazy. In my imagination, I divorced my husband and took my maiden name. Now she considers herself the wife of an English aristocrat and insists on being called Lady Smith. As for the children, she imagines that every night she has a new child. Every time I visit, she says, "Doctor, I had a baby last night." The ships of her dreams were wrecked on the rocks of real life, but in the sunny fantasy land of madness, all her brigantines arrive safely in port with sails raised, singing under the pressure of the wind filling them. Tragic. I really don't know, her psychiatrist told me, even if I could restore her psyche, I wouldn't do it. In her current position, she is much happier. If some individuals are so preoccupied with the need for self-affirmation that they really go crazy to find it, then imagine what miracles we can achieve by revealing to people the correct perception of this side of madness. One of the first businessmen whose salary exceeded $1 million a year was Charles Schwab. There was no income tax then, and $50 a week was considered a very good income. At that time, 38-year-old Andrew Carnegie invited him to the position of the first president of the newly organized State Steel Company in 1921. Schwab later left the company to take over the struggling Battlehem Steel Company and turn it into America's most profitable company. Why Andrew Carnegie paid Charles Schwab $1 million a year, that is, more than $3,000 a day. Why? Because Schwab is a genius? No. Because he knew steel production better than others. Nonsense. Charles Schwab told me that the company employs many people who understand this better than he does. Schwab himself believed that he received such a high salary mainly for his ability to treat people. I asked him to tell me how he does it. I bring to your attention his secret, stated in his own words. These words should be cast from eternal bronze and hung in every house, in every school, in every store and in every institution. Instead of spending time memorizing Latin verbs or memorizing the amount of precipitation that falls in Brazil, children should learn these words by heart, taking their motto, "We can radically change our lives." I consider my most valuable quality to be the ability to arouse people's enthusiasm, Schwab said. And I believe that recognizing the merits and rewards is the only way to identify the best qualities of employees. Nothing hits a person's ambition as hard as criticism from the leadership. I never criticize anyone. I believe in the reality of encouragement, so I strive to praise people and avoid swearing. If I like something, I am sincere in my assessment and generous in my praise. That's what Schwab does. And what about an ordinary person? Just the opposite. If he doesn't like something, he bursts into curses, and if he likes it, he prefers to remain silent. As they say in an old verse, I did something bad once and I've been hearing about it ever since. Another time I did well twice, but I didn't hear a word about it. In the course of numerous contacts with many wonderful people in different parts of the world, Schwab said, I have never met a person, no matter how high a post he holds, who would not work more efficiently and would not show more diligence in an atmosphere of goodwill, and not in an atmosphere of criticism. This, according to him, was one of the main reasons for the phenomenal success of Andrew Carnegie, who praised his colleagues both publicly and privately, wanting to pay tribute to his assistants. Even on his own tombstone, he wrote the following epitaph for himself: "Here lies a man who knew how to gather around him people who were smarter than him." One of the secrets of Rockefeller's success in managing people was his sincere, benevolent assessment of their activities. For example, when one of his partners, Edward Batford, lost $1 million belonging to the firm as a result of an unsuccessful deal in South America, Rockefeller had every reason to criticize. However, he knew that Batford was trying to do the best he could, and the incident was closed. Moreover, Rockefeller found a reason for praise and thanked the partner who managed to save 60% of the invested capital. "That's excellent," Rockefeller said. "We don't always manage to work so well here on the top floor. A story has long been kept among my papers, which never really happened, but which tells so truthfully that I will repeat it here. One farmer at the end of a hard day's work put an armful of hay on the table in front of her husband and sons, and replied to the reimbursed reviews about her mental health, 'But how did I know you'd notice? I've been cooking for you for 20 years and in all that time I haven't heard a single word that I could guess that you don't eat oats.'" When a few years ago, a sociological study was conducted on the reasons for the departure of women from the family, what do you think turned out to be the main reason? Lack of gratitude. And I am ready to swear that the corresponding survey among men would have given the same results. Often we get so used to taking our spouses for granted that we forget to show how much we value them. A student of one of our groups told about a request his wife made to him. She and several other women from their church participated in a self-improvement program, and she asked her husband to help her by making a list of 6 things he thought she could do to become a better wife. This is how he describes the subsequent events: "I was surprised by such a request. To tell the truth, it would not be difficult for me to write out 6 points that I would like to change in it. But for her part, she could name 1,000 things that should be changed in me. So I asked, 'Let me think until morning.' In the morning I got up very early, called the florist and asked her to send her 6 red roses with a note, 'I can't think of 6 qualities that I would like to change in you. I love you just the way you are.' When I got home in the evening, who do you think met me at the door? That's right. My wife. There were tears in her eyes. Words were not needed. I was happy that I refrained from criticism, even though she herself asked for it. The following Sunday at church, after she told the other participants of the program about the results of her assignment, several women with whom she was engaged approached me with the words, 'It was the most tactful thing we've ever heard of.' That's when I realized the price of gratitude." Florence Ziegfeld, the most brilliant of all the producers who have ever amazed Broadway, owes her reputation to her subtle ability to exalt the American girl. From time to time he would take some small colorless creature that he didn't want to look at twice and turn it on stage into a charming, mysterious, and seductive vision. Knowing the importance of praise and trust, Ziegfeld, with his gallant, helpful treatment, made women feel beautiful. As a practical man, he raised the salary of the girls from the corps de ballet from $30 a week to $175. He knew how to show chivalry by sending congratulatory telegrams to the stars participating in the review on the opening day and showering every dancer with Rose's American Beauty. Once, having ventured to experience the delights of fasting, I did not eat anything for 6 days and nights. It turned out to be easy. By the end of the 6th day I was even less hungry than by the end of the 2nd. We all know people who will not allow their families or employees to remain without food for 6 days, even considering the thought of it as a crime. However, they with a clear conscience leave both of them for 6 days, 6 weeks, and sometimes 60 years without sincere recognition of their merits, as necessary to them as food. Playing the main role in the play Reunion in Vienna, Alfred Lunt, one of the greatest actors of his time, said, "Most of all I need the support of self-esteem." We care about the physical condition of our children, friends, and employees, but how rarely do we cherish their sense of self-esteem, providing them with fried meat and potatoes to maintain vitality. We often neglect kind words of recognition that will sound in their memory for many years like the music of the morning stars. Paul Harvey, in one of his radio shows ending the story, told how sincere appreciation can change a person's life. One day many years ago, a teacher from Detroit asked a blind boy, Steve Morris, to help her find a mouse hiding somewhere in the classroom. You see, she recognized the fact that nature had rewarded Steve with something that no one else present had. As compensation for his blindness, nature gave him a surprisingly fine hearing, but for the first time in Steve's life, someone appreciated his unique abilities. Now, years later, he says that this episode was the beginning of a new life. From that day on, he began to develop his gift, and now under the stage name Stevie Wonder is known as one of the most popular singers and songwriters of the 70s. Some, hearing these lines, will immediately exclaim, "Lisping, climb, compliments. I've tried all these techniques, they don't work, anyway, they're not for smart people." Of course, climbing is empty, selfish and fake, so it rarely affects discerning people. She is doomed to fail, which usually happens. However, it is also true that some people are so eager for recognition that they will swallow anything, just as, escaping from starvation, a person eats grass and worms. Even Queen Victoria was susceptible to flattery. Prime Minister Disraeli confessed that when dealing with the Queen, he very often resorted to flattery, scattered it with a shovel. That's how his exact words sound. But Disraeli was one of the most dexterous and skillful men who ever ruled the vast British Empire. He was a genius in his own way, and what worked well in his performance, you and I will not necessarily succeed. In the end, climbing can do more harm than good. It is false to climb and, like fake money, can eventually lead to trouble when trying to use it. How to tell the difference between recognition of virtues and flattery? Very simple. The first is sincere, the second is hypocritical. Recognition comes from the heart, climbing only from the mouth. The first is selfless, the second is selfish. Recognition is admired, and flattery is censured. Not so long ago I saw a bust of the hero of Mexico, General Alvar Obregón, in the Chapultepec Palace in Mexico City. His wise words are carved under the bust: "Do not be afraid of enemies attacking you. Be afraid of friends flattering you. No. No, and no again." I'm not suggesting you use climb at all. I am far from that. It's just about a new way of life. Let me repeat myself. I'm talking about a new lifestyle. King George V placed 6 aphorisms on the walls of his office at Buckingham Palace. One of them read, "Don't teach me not to give away, not to receive cheap praise." This is flattery. Cheap praise. One day I read the definition of this word, which is worth quoting here. Climbing in its meaning exactly coincides with what a person thinks about himself. No matter what language you use, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, you can never say more than what you really are. If everything we do was flattery, everyone could understand it, and we would all become experts in the field of human relations. If we are not immersed in thinking about any particular problem, we usually spend about 95% of our time thinking about ourselves. It is worth stopping this activity for a while and thinking about the good features of the interlocutor, and we will not have to resort to cheap and fake flattery, which can be recognized before it leaves our lips. The most forgotten virtues of our days are gratitude and appreciation. For some reason, we forget to praise our son or daughter when they bring home good grades. It does not occur to us to reward them with warm words for the first time baked pie or built a birdhouse. After all, nothing pleases children more than the interest and praise of parents. The next time you taste the tenderest fillet in a restaurant, tell the cook that it was perfectly cooked. And when a tired salesman shows you an amazing courtesy, please mark it with gratitude. Every minister, lecturer or speaker has repeatedly felt how enthusiasm disappears when a person goes on stage in front of an audience and does not hear a single encouraging remark. This applies not only to professionals, but even more so to workers in offices, shops and factories, members of our families and friends. In interpersonal communication, we should never forget that there are people waiting for recognition next to us. This is a legitimate portion of the warmth that every soul craves. Try to light up your everyday life with small sparks of gratitude. You will see how these sparks will ignite the little lights of friendship that will grow and serve you as real beacons next time. Pamela Dunham from Fairfield, Connecticut, had to supervise a janitor on duty, who was very poorly coping with his duties. The rest of the employees laughed at him and deliberately littered in the corridor to emphasize his poor work, but this did not add to the cleanliness of the store. Trying to get this person to work in various ways, Pamela noticed that from time to time everything turns out quite well for him. On such days, she tried to praise him publicly. After a while he began to clean better and soon he was doing his job quite effectively. Now he is coping brilliantly, and everyone who works nearby is grateful to him. Sincere gratitude gave results where criticism and ridicule did not help. Having offended a person, you will never change him, and even more so you will never inspire him. A wise man told me that he made the following inscription on the mirror, where it does not interfere, but you can see it every day. I will walk this path only once, so any good that I can do, all the kindness that I can show to people, all this I have to do now. I cannot forget it or postpone it, because I will walk this path only once. Emerson said, "Every person I have met is superior to me in some way, and I have something to learn from him." If this statement is true for Emerson, it must be 1,000 times more true for you and me. Let's stop thinking about our own achievements and desires and try to evaluate the positive aspects of other people. Forget about the flattery, put up only honest and truthful assessments. Be sincere in your praise and generous in your approval, and people will cherish your words and repeat them all your life many years after you forget about them. Let's give honest and truthful assessments.
Dear listeners, write down what other books you would like to listen to in audio format. Thank you for your likes and comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We wish you all the best.